And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Hi there, I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook on this Sunday, July 20th, 2025. We start with the state of the sea ice. The Chukchi Sea is largely open now, especially along the Alaskan coast from the Bering Strait all the way up to Wainwright. We still have some areas of ice along especially the Beaufort Sea coastline from Utqiagvik to Kaktovik, though things continue to gradually melt off as we head through the mid and into the later summer period. Now, late tonight into Monday morning, there is going to be an area of weakening low pressure just outside the Gulf of Anadyr and west of St. Lawrence Island. This feature will continue northeastward and gradually weaken Monday into early Tuesday. This is actually part of a larger mid and upper level low pressure circulation that's over the northern half of the Bering Sea. This is also helping. This ridge that's been in the North Pacific extending into the Gulf is starting to break down and will gradually collapse Monday into Tuesday, but still the Panhandle should be able to squeak out a couple of more warm days with some periods of sunshine. Temperatures could reach the 70s in areas of the Panhandle again on Monday, possibly into Tuesday. And then the interior is going to see more moisture spreading west to east, leading to showers and perhaps a few thunderstorms with the driest conditions along the Alcan border. And going into Monday afternoon, we have still high pressure anchored down in the North Pacific with a weakening ridge up toward the Panhandle. There's a secondary ridge of high pressure or a lobe that extends up toward the Alaska Peninsula. That's actually going to retrograde westward. And Monday afternoon, you can see that weakening surface low there near the Bering Strait. By the time we get into Tuesday, that feature is gone, but the energy is going to begin to transfer southeastward. We do have a weak low develop along the far northwestern Gulf Coast. Nothing especially strong, but there is going to be a circulation there. And other than that, it looks like the energy will transfer later in the week and carve out another area of low pressure that will likely bring some breezier conditions and some rainfall to the Panhandle later this week and especially next weekend. So in the meantime, Monday, warm one in the Panhandles where you have sunshine. You're away from the influences of the sea breezes. You could see temperatures well into the 70s. A few spots could even hit 80. There's a heat advisory for the southern part of the Panhandle for Monday later morning, afternoon. Look for inner channels, Lynn Canal, south wind 10 knots, westerly winds 10 knots there around Frederick Sound and including Stevens Passage, waves a foot or two, and then northwest winds 15 knots, 3-foot waves there, Clarence Strait down to the Dixon entrance. Strongest winds in the Panhandle Monday will be the outer coast around Port Alexander to off of Craig. We're looking at northwest winds of 25 knots, waves 6 to 8 feet. Coming up along the coast, winds generally westerly about 10 knots, waves running 3 or 4 feet. On Tuesday, south winds 10 knots within Lynn Canal, waves a foot or two. Southwest winds 10 knots there, Stevens Passage, waves a foot or two. Northwest winds 10 knots, waves a foot or two there, Ketchikan, Metlakatla, still 20 to 25 knot. Northwest winds from around Port Alexander down to off of Craig. And then westerly winds 10, 15 knots outside of Cross Sound, south of Yakutat, switching around to the east, 10 knots at Cape Suckling. For Monday, strongest winds across the northwestern Gulf will be Lower Cook Inlet and along the eastern Kenai northeast there of Kodiak Island. Winds will generally be westerly 25 knots with waves running 5-6 feet. As we get up into Upper Cook Inlet, look for southwest winds of 10 knots, waves 2 to 3 feet. And within Prince William Sound, that wider expanse, west winds of 10 knots and waves running a couple of feet. For Tuesday, winds will be westerly 20 knots within Prince William Sound, 3 to 4 foot waves. Look for variable winds near Kayak Island at just 10 knots. And then along the eastern Kenai coast, northwest winds to 25 knots. Strongest winds Tuesday will be Kamishak Bay to Kennedy Entrance. Winds westerly 30 knots with waves 8-9 feet, and westerly winds trail off to 15 knots up there as you get toward Anchorage with waves running a couple of feet. So across Kodiak Island Monday, west-southwest winds 20-25 knots, strongest there within Shelikof Strait, waves 4-5 feet. As we trail out, though, along the Alaska Peninsula, because remember that lobe of high pressure, winds will be variable at just 10 knots either side, with waves not more than 2-3 feet. And then on Tuesday, winds are going to be still westerly, 20-25 knots around Kodiak Island, but then as we come down along the peninsula, Pacific side, northwest winds 15 to 20 knots. On the Bering side, west winds of 15 knots and waves generally just a few feet. The Aleutians show that little lobe of high pressure, variable winds, eastern central Aleutians only around 10 knots. You get west of Adak, southwest winds 15 to 20 knots for Monday. And then on Tuesday, generally more of the same for the eastern and central Aleutians, variable winds at just 10 knots. You get west of Adak, winds actually come back around to the east-southeast at 15 to 20 knots, especially up there toward Kiska and Shemya. And then strongest winds on Monday will be along areas of the west-southwest coast, St. Matthew, up along the lower Yukon coast to the wider expanse of Norton Sound. South-southwest winds 25 knots with waves running at least 4 or 5 feet, as high as 8 feet out towards St. Matthew. And then on Tuesday, winds generally are going to turn more southwesterly across a broad area of the region at 15 to 20 knots from Bristol Bay, Kuskokwim Bay along the lower Yukon coast into Norton Sound, and look for waves anywhere from 3 to 4 to locally as high as 5 feet out toward the Pribilovs, St. Matthew, and again within this wider expanse of Norton Sound between Nome and Kotlik. And then for the northern areas for Monday, on the St. Lawrence Island, west side of the Seward Peninsula, south winds of 20 knots, waves 4 or 5 feet. As we come up through the lower Chukchi, look for southeast to south winds at 15 knots, turning southwesterly, coming around the Lisburn Peninsula at 10 knots. And then as we encounter the Beaufort Sea, Utqiagvik through Kaktovik on Monday, winds will be only around 5 knots vicinity of Utqiagvik, but then picking up 10 to 15 knots, Prudhoe Bay to Kaktovik. And then on Tuesday, a little bit of a mixed bag of winds along the Beaufort Sea coast. West winds 10 knots at Kaktovik, waves a foot or 2. Southeast to east winds only 5 knots, Prudhoe Bay through Utqiagvik, with waves only around a foot where you don't have any ice. And then coming down through the Chukchi Sea, look for east-southeast winds turning southerly, 10 to 15 knots through the Bering Strait with waves 2 to 3 feet. And then finally, north side of St. Lawrence Island, gamble on up over toward the west side of the Seward Peninsula. Winds will be southwesterly 15 knots on Tuesday with waves running 3 to as high as 5 feet.